Hello, I'm Aarti Sarwal. I'm an associate professor in neurology at Wake Forest School of Medicine. And today I'll be sharing my perspectives with some emerging practices and new developments in the management of intracranial hemorrhage. Let's beat the bleeds. I have no relevant disclosures. Intracranial hemorrhage only accounts for 10 to 20% of all strokes, but has significant contribution to mortality, with published literature reporting up to 80% mortality in patients enrolled in research trials. 20 to 40% only have been known to recover functional outcomes in 6 months if you go by historical data. The three major contributors, hypertension, amyloid angiopathy, and coagulopathy, have been targets of therapeutic interventions. And unfortunately, about a third to half of these intracranial hemorrhages expand upon arrival to a healthcare facility, with early clinical deterioration happening in the very hyperacute 1 to 6 hour period. There are medical management strategies for supportive care, and the current paradigms favor surgical decompression only for infratentorial bleeds that are large and have mass effect or brainstem compression, or supratentorial bleeds with impending herniation. Taking care of ICH is very costly, and ICH costs the society a lot. The estimated lifetime cost for a new case of ICH is $123,000 by most conservative estimates, and with about 70 to 80,000 new cases each year, $8 to $9 billion of the long-term disability and impairment of quality of life of these patients. 38 to 80% of the patients with ICH present to a community emergency department before they are transferred to a facility that can offer them neurosurgical consultation or neurointensive care. Though there are early signals in published literature that care in a specialized unit, a neurocritical care unit, may be superior, transit delays continue to happen in arrival of these patients to specialized care. And during these transit delays, blood pressure management, neurological assessments, reversal of coagulopathy, which could be a contributor to hematoma expansion, journal critical care, and cerebral edema management may be highly inconsistent and variable, affecting outcomes. This is translated in early studies reflecting that ICH patients that have delays of more than 5 to 6 hours of getting to specialized care have increased length of stay and mortality. And this transit delay also explains to a large extent the rural urban disparities that occur in outcomes of ICH patients despite adjustment for risk factors. The fact that 35% of the ICHs in recent studies have been shown to expand in first 3 hours and another 16% in 3 to 6 hours makes it a priority for us to make sure that these patients get to the right care at the right time. In the following slides, I will go over a few consensus-based current practices for ICH management, focusing on blood pressure, reversal of antithrombotics, current concept in anti-epileptic prophylaxis, hematoma expansion evaluation, cerebral edema management, and some evolving new surgical management techniques that make it possible for us to see new research trials affecting outcomes in the future. Blood pressure management has been the holy grail of ICH medical management, with emerging trials showing newer data that helps us figure out the optimal blood pressure target um, with caveats. The American Stroke Association guidelines continue to maintain class 1 evidence for ICH patients to be managed to treat their blood pressure lower than 140 systolic if they present hypertensive between 150 to 220. And there is suggestion as a class 2A evidence that this could be effective for improving functional outcomes. The guidelines for 220 and above in older versions continue to maintain an attempt at 25% reduction in the blood pressure in the initial period. The important key trials to know would be the ATAC trial, especially the second ATAC trial that had an intensive and a conservative treatment arm and showed a higher rate of renal adverse events to the patients that had intensive treatment less than 140 target, aggressively treated with intravenous nicardipine. Of note, the patients in this group had much lower target um, actually achieved blood pressures compared to 140, and that could have contributed to ischemic injury of the kidney. Other trials to know are the INTERACT 2 trial and a recent observational published study from the VISTA ICH group that reflected some signals towards continuing to maintain systolic blood pressure of less than 140 in the first 24 hours as being suggestively associated with better functional outcomes. On the corollary, ischemia caused by this aggressive reduction of blood pressure is an ongoing concern. People have shown ischemic lesions on MRI called DWI lesions in patients that have greater acute blood pressure reductions, and these seem to correlate to adverse 90-day outcomes. European Stroke Association guidelines continue to maintain a lower target that should not be ignored and continue to maintain that while systolic less than 140 should be targeted, the lower level of this should not be less than 90 or 110 depending on the version. Recent observational studies have also shown the delta of blood pressure reduction more than 40 could be harmful for ICH patients. The latest ENLS guidelines, Emergency Neurological Life Support, do provide a caveat to this emerging literature and suggest early reduction to 140 to 180, especially for patients with more than 220 presenting blood pressure, and then cautious blood pressure reduction in patients based on their history of chronic hypertension and other risk factors. Reversal of antithrombotics is another easy therapeutic target for managing patients who have coagulopathy induced intracranial hemorrhage. With new stents, with new cerebrovascular and cardiovascular protection research emerging favoring antithrombotic use and newer anticoagulating agents coming to the market, it is extremely important to engage your pharmacists and have a structured reversal care pathway that is easily available to your emergency folks, your critical care folks, that targets specific reversal agents and doses based on the patient profile, accounting for their renal, hepatic, and last dose considerations. Early reversal in literature has shown signals of improving outcomes and hematoma stability and has been chosen to be a potential therapeutic target by a quality initiative undertaken by American Stroke Association called the Hemorrhagic Stroke Collaborative. For antithrombotic reversal with platelet transfusions, patch trials showed no significant benefit, although patients who are surgical candidates with high expanding bleeds with dual antithrombotics or more potent antithrombotics may benefit in a small subset of patients. Other trials to know are the trials comparing vitamin K, FFP, and PCC, and current practice favors early institution of PCC for warfarin-induced coagulopathy. There are guidelines for reversal of antithrombotics from Neurocritical Care Society, but the core emphasis here is to involve your pharmacists and ensure that there is an institute-specific targeted reversal of antithrombotic pathway for intracranial hemorrhage that accounts for renal hepatic considerations. Anti-epileptic prophylaxis. A few years ago, we used to prophylax and prevent seizures in every ICH patient, thinking that deterioration caused by clinical seizures can be prevented by instituting anti-seizure meds. Our literature has now shown that prophylactic anti-epileptic therapy has independent association with adverse cognitive outcomes at 6 months in patients, irrespective of the agent, whether it's phenytoin or levetiracetam. American Heart Association guidelines accounted for these emerging data and recommended clinical seizures to be treated with anti-seizure drugs as well as electrographic seizures, and favored the use of continuous EEG monitoring in patients that had an exam out of proportion or altered compared to the degree of brain injury, and did not recommend prophylactic anti-seizure medications. Yale group, led by Dr. Gilmore, looked at the ongoing practices and did find the overall incidence of seizures after symptomatic ICH to be 1.7 to 31% in high risk patients who undergo continuous EEG monitoring despite receiving seizure prophylaxis. And less than 90% of these patients had seizures in the first 3 days, making this a target for aggressive monitoring as well as management if we find electrographic seizures. The highest rate seems to be occurring in patients that were undergoing hematoma evacuation, identifying a subset. And 22 to 76% of these patients with spontaneous ICH had non convulsive seizures. And about 7% of all monitored patients had non convulsive status epilepticus. They have recommended a guided approach that centers on patients' clinical risk factors, surgical course, as well as electrographic features. Patients who have depressed mental status, have impending herniation, and have very high cortical location could be targeted for aggressive EEG monitoring. And if the EEG monitoring shows electrographic patterns consistent with epileptogenicity, high risk of seizures, or definite electrographic seizures, these patients can be prophylaxed with antiepileptics for 7 days with aggressive evaluation for weaning these antiepileptics. This seems to be a more structured approach than empiric antiepileptic prophylaxis in all patients. People have looked at hematoma expansion, radiological markers like the CT spot sign, which is a hyper intense signal on a CT angio with contrast and shows a place of active extravasation and may predict hematoma expansion. Blend sign, where you can see two different intensities blending in an ICH, have been the target for early identification of patients for hematoma expansion and then targeting them for more aggressive blood pressure stabilization or other measures of ICP management and reversal of coagulopathy. In patients on antithrombotics, people have tried to investigate risk factors to have predictive score modeling on patients that are high risk of bleeds so they can be monitored more aggressively. And this definitely seems to be a preventative approach that would benefit from further investigative research. Once ICH does occur, perilesional edema seems to be a major contributor to both ischemia around the brain as well as further mortality. And the guidelines for cerebral edema management rest on prevention of fevers, normocarbia, normoglycemia, and when the patient requires escalation to osmotic therapy, literature seems to favor use of hypertonic saline over mannitol in lower evidence studies. It's also suggested to have a symptom-based bolus dosing or targeted sodium goals. Steroids and therapeutic hypothermia have unfortunately not shown benefit and actually shown harm, and so did desferrioxamine trials. Many trials are currently focusing on prevention of perilesional edema, and a recent phase 2A trial of an apolipoprotein CN105 showed early success at safety, and current trials are focusing on fingolimod and siponimod as targeted therapy for preventing perilesional edema. We've kind of come to a conclusion that in addition to addressing the genomics and risk factors and preventing hematoma expansion, removal of blood products that seems to be a big trigger of perilesional edema seems to be a good target for reducing inflammation in addition to good neuroprotective and rehab therapies that continue to be investigated in ICH. To that effect, people have addressed surgical evacuation. Unfortunately, the two major trials with open craniotomy-based surgical evacuation of ICH did not show any benefit between the medical and the surgical arms. In Stitch 1 trial and Stitch 2 trial addressed a smaller subset of high cortical bleeds that seemed to have showed signals towards better benefit in Stitch 1, but did not reproduce in the second randomized control trial. People have explored minimally invasive evacuation techniques with early signals of decreased mortality and better functional outcomes if hematoma reduction was achieved. And these therapies seem to be based both on image guidance to place a drainage catheter in the bleed itself and using a lytic solution like TPA, or just mechanical endoscopic based ICH evacuation. In the following few slides, I will review a few of these minimally surgical techniques that have now caught on to practice, and you will see more and more of these techniques happening in your neurocritical care units. MISTY trial recently published its phase 3 open label study on looking at a stereotactic guided EVD placement with TPA enhanced surgical evacuation, and unfortunately did not reach endpoints for showing better benefit in the intervention trial. What it did show was that clot site reduction to less than 15 ml seemed to have better MRS scores at 365 days in the patients who had clot stabilization, giving us a subset of patients or a target to go for. Compared to other published literature where up to 70 to 80% patients died and 20 to 40% patients only had functional recovery, almost half of the patients had good functional outcomes, even those with large ICHs. And the positive endpoint of the trial that made this a positive trial was that 80% of the patients were living at home or in active rehab 1 year after the stroke with an acceptable quality of life, very different than prior published literature. The trial was hallmarked by low frequency of withdrawal of care, guideline-driven intensive care, achievement of stability of hematoma growth as a target, and has encouraged further investigations. Endoscopic surgery, mechanical evacuation of the trial showed early promise in the ICS trial, although small patients, and led to further techniques like the brain path technique for minimally invasive parafascicular surgery that, though had earlier complications at a higher frequency, led to evolution of the techniques, and a current trial called the ENRICH trial has addressed these perioperative complications and is assessing the efficacy of this intervention in a multi-center RCT, enrolling patients currently. People have kind of taken a wound vac approach to ICH, and the Apollo system has been tested in a smaller trials, and a current trial called INVEST is investigating this in a phase 2 manner as well. The Mount Sinai group has combined multiple therapies, a dry field condition of surgical evacuation using an endoscope or an Apollo system, then using an electrocautery to make sure there is no excessive bleed, and then using a fluid-filled cavity wet field strategy to ensure no hematoma leakage, and then using perilesional ultrasound to maintain and ensure hematoma has been evacuated and seems to be promising. People are looking at ECOS catheter, just like pulmonary embolism in ICH as well. This is one of our patients that we did with a microcraniotomy catheter, a simple EVD placed stereotactically in the ICH assisted with TPA thrombolysis, kind of like MISTY, but a poor man's MISTY technique. And this patient had left hemiplegia worsening from the initial presentation of hemiparesis that led to an EVD placement. And this is patient's first CT scan. You can see the left EVD and the hematoma on the right side. And this is his hematoma has been evacuated significantly and is currently reduced in size. And 6 months later, this patient only had the encephalomalacia and significant reduction and actually came back to work with significantly minimal deficits. I hope that this talk gives you a perspective on the emerging promising approaches to minimally invasive evacuation of ICH. Patient selection seems to be the key, and surgical endpoints of hematoma reduction are very important investigative approach. Guidelines-based intensive care continues to be important, and recent trials have highlighted pragmatic use of withdrawal of care, which seems to be a major contributor of mortality, and stability of hematoma expansion needs to be a focus of critical care interventions. Thank you for your time.